Hi, I am Becky Meagher and welcome to Transitions, Body, Mind, Spirit. Transitions, we all have that in our lives. We go from one thing to another, and I like to use the metaphor of triathlons, something I've been doing 12, 13 years. And in a triathlon, the first thing you do is you get in the water and you swim. Then you get to the transition area and change again, and then you bike. And then transition again, and then you run. And it's a great metaphor for what we do in our lives, how we change from one thing to another, how we grow, how things happen. And we have a very interesting guest. Now, you probably heard of people talking about, oh, I've done a little 5K run, a 3K run. What about, and that's like a couple miles. What about if you do 25 miles? Or what about if you do 50 miles? Or what about 100 miles? Well, Ryne Anderson has done 100 miles, and he is called an ultra runner. And he's going to talk about the process of doing that, and also what he does to inspire kids at Curry Ingram School, too. So welcome, Ryne Anderson.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Becky.
Yeah. It's really exciting to have you here, and I run, but I find it fascinating, the world of ultra running. Mm-hmm. And can you explain to somebody out there who doesn't even know what that means, comparing the little 5K run that everybody does to an ultra run, and what is ultra running?
So the basic definition of an ultra marathon is any distance greater than 26.2 miles, a marathon. And the standard distances are 50K, 50 kilometers, 50 miler, 100K, which comes out to be about 62 miles, and 100 miler. And over the past couple years, there's even been the start of some 200-mile races. So yeah, and they're typically on trails, but you have road ultra marathons. Badwater is a very famous one that runs through Death Valley in the summer, 135 miles.
Wow.
But yeah, most of them are on trails, but they're all also on road. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of like to harken back to when you were a kid, mm-hmm. and you were starting to do athletic things, mm-hmm. and how did that actually change from? Were you in a track or something in high school? How did you morph into where you are now?
Yeah, so I grew up playing baseball and football. I wanted to bat leadoff and play center field for the Braves. That was my big dream. And then I went to college and played football instead at Maryville College. It's Division III, the lowest in the collegiate ranks you could play. So smaller people like myself could play. But I suffered, I believe it was my third concussion that was pretty severe. And I had to stop playing, but I'd always been an athlete. I'd always been active. So I was like, well, I need to do something. I'll start running. And triathlons were popular at the time. So mm-hmm. I was like, I'll try a triathlon. So I dabbled in that for a bit, and I was about to get pretty invested in that. I was going to sign up for the Chattanooga Ironman Triathlon. I remember sitting at my desk at school, waiting for registration to open at 11, and 5 minutes, I think even sooner than that, it was sold out. And I was like, well, what am I going to do now? I had this big plan. I was going to do it.
There was the Ironman?
Yeah, it was a full Ironman. And thankfully it sold out, because then I stumbled across ultra marathons and trail running. I was like, that sounds pretty cool. I want to get into that. And yeah, I'm glad that race sold out, because I don't think I may have gotten into ultra marathons much later, but yeah.
So you started with the swim, bike, run, mm-hmm. gradually getting into mm-hmm. it?
I did a sprint, and then...
and tell everybody what a sprint is.
A sprint distance is typically a 400-meter swim to maybe a half-mile swim. It really varies. Maybe like a 13-mile bike ride. That can be shorter, maybe a little longer. And then it's usually a 5K run. It's the lowest triathlon distance. Then you move up to the Olympic distance. It's 0.9 mile swim. What is it on the bike? 40K?
I do. Yeah. It's a like 25 miles.
Yeah, and then like a 10K run, then you got the half Ironman distance and full Ironman distance. Yeah.
Okay, so you were gearing up for the full Ironman, and fate would have it you couldn't get in.
Yeah, which turned out for the best. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So then you decided, okay, I'll try ultra running. So what was the process? Because what's the most you'd ever run before that?
So I did a half marathon in Oak Ridge, Tennessee.
Okay, so that is
13.1
miles.
miles.
Okay.
And I got through that, and then the next day I was already like, well, what's next?
Wow.
And then that's usually the things people go through after a big race. They either hated it and they're done, or it's like, what's next? What's the biggest thing? And then it was going to be triathlons, but that didn't happen. And then I was in the Bellevue Library here in Nashville, looking in the sports section, and pulled out this book called Ultra Marathon Man by Dean Karnazes, which he's a very famous ultra runner. I was like, this sounds interesting. So I went home and read it, and I got through it super quick. And I was reading about this race called Badwater and Western States 100 miler, and I was like, wow, this sounds crazy. How can somebody do that? I want to try.
Wow.
So then I worked my way up. I did a half marathon trail race. And
okay, now let's talk about the half marathon trail race. What is a trail race?
A trail race predominantly takes place on trails. Usually you're going to have some road sections in there to get the required distance, or maybe you start in a parking lot or on a road, so everybody doesn't form a conga line on the trails and just going really slow.
Right.
But yeah, it's usually on the trails, and out west that may be in some big mountains. Out here it's usually on more technical terrain, lots of rocks and roots. But yeah, you'll get in the forest of trees. You don't hear cars going by. There's not people cheering you on every 10, 20 yards. You get on the single track and you're in nature, and it's just you. And yeah, there's some other people racing around. You'll come across an aid station every now and then, but it's a much more intimate experience.
I know I have done some trail running, and a lot of it at Percy Warner Park was looking out for tree roots, almost killing myself with stubbing my toe, and then. So what are you looking at when you're in the woods, and are you have to, there's things in your way?
Yeah, depending on how technical the terrain is, how many rocks and roots there are. I'm either looking down so I don't trip and catch my toe, or if the terrain's not too bad, then I'll be looking up. But yeah, you definitely have to check on the ground a lot more versus when you're running on the greenway with a paved path.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So the very first race that you did, that was the trail run, where was that?
It was in Chattanooga, Tennessee.
Okay.
And they've got a great trail running culture there. They've got lots of trail races down there. They're put on by Wild Trails. It's a nonprofit down there. They've helped build a lot of the trails down there. They do a really, really great job of promoting the trails and through the races and just trail building. It's really, really neat organization.
So what was that terrain like?
It was, I would say, fairly mild for Southeastern trail standards, because we're known for having very rocky, big rocks, little rocks, lots of roots, gnarly terrain. But that had a good mix of some of the more technical stuff, but then I had some terrain where you could definitely look around and not fall on your face.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was the first.
Yeah, that was my first trail race, a half marathon distance.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then that whetted your appetite.
Yes, it did. I was like, wow, this is awesome. Yeah, I want some more.
Wow. Wow. And so then what happened next?
So the website you go to sign up for trail races is ultrasignup.com, and it's like any website where you can search by races. So I was like, okay, 50K, what's one? And Stump Jump, which is a very, very popular race in Chattanooga. It's a classic. People will come from all over the Southeast to do that one. And I was like, okay, that one looks cool. I'll sign up for it. And there was about a 4-month span there. I was able to train and started doing my first really long runs, and I was like, oh, there's no way I can cover 31 miles, but maybe I can. But that's what makes it fun, is you never run that distance in training because you'd be tired all the time and you'd never be able to recover. But your body and mainly your mind, if you want it bad enough and you're prepared physically and you're prepared for those low spots and those rough patches, then you can get through it. Yeah. Yeah.
So do you self-train? Do you read books and figure out, like that, particularly for that 31 miles, and you're going, I don't know if I can do this. How'd you figure out how to get there?
Yeah, whenever I dive into a new hobby, I go all in. So I was watching a bunch of YouTube videos, reading a bunch of things online, getting books, and I love the technical nature of things. When I played baseball and football, I was a geek of the sport. I love the technique. I love the history. And so when I started getting into trails and ultra running, I started listening to podcasts all about it, and the history, and the different philosophies on training and things like that, and just consumed all that information. And then not long after that race, I joined a trail running group through Nashville Running Company, and then that spurred making some really, really great friends here in the Nashville area, because there's quite a few people that run ultras here in Nashville. There's a cool community of people here in the city. Well, yeah, we got lots of hills, but people that like to go out and do big races out west in the mountains, or even big races out here.
Wow. Wow. So there was the 31 mile, and when you finished it, how did you feel?
I was ecstatic. I had trained right. I got through it. I didn't really have any super low patches. I was like, wow, I did it, and I had fun. I don't regret that. And then said, yeah, what's the next thing? Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a joyous thing for you, and you weren't exhausted. You were more exalted at the end of that.
Yeah, because I think the distance scared me so much. I took the preparation and training so seriously, so I was ready on that day. I wasn't undertrained. I wasn't unprepared. I didn't have any major surprises that made the day turn into a catastrophe. And yeah, it wound up being a successful day. I didn't care too much about my time. I just wanted to finish and have fun, and that happened. And yeah, it's like, what's next?
Okay, then what was next?
What was next? Then I did a few more 50Ks in the spring, and then I did my first 50-miler in July the following year out in Washington State.
Washington State?
Yeah, in the mountains out there. It runs near Mount Rainier. You don't get up that high to 14,000 feet, but that mountain's so big you can see it from pretty much all of Washington for the most part. And that race didn't go as well. Yeah, for whatever reason. I think I was undertrained. It was not I didn't feel exalted. It wasn't a joyous experience, but still after that, that left me hungry. I was like, well, do I really want to do this? Like that 50-miler was a lot harder, but that challenge made me want to find the next one and be better prepared. And
were you able to finish that?
I did finish, yeah.
Okay.
Much beyond my goal time, and lots of walking at the end, but I did finish, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Wow. And to train for the 50-miler, give us a snapshot of, well, you're supposed to do X amount of miles per week, per day. People who don't understand, how do you do this? Tell us.
So I'd say for a 50-miler, the minimum you would need to run is 30 miles a week, but that's pretty low. I typically run between 50 to 60 miles a week.
Okay.
Some people will run a whole lot more. Some people will run 80, above 100, but you can only run as much as time and your body allows. And you want to match the terrain of the race you're doing. So for that race, it had over 10,000 feet of climbing and descending. So lots of climbing and descending. So I was making sure to get that type of climbing in my training. But then some ultras you could do that are pretty flat. So you need to make sure most of your training is you're running most of the time. But yeah, to make that jump up, one thing people do is like the back-to-back long run of try to get a 20-miler on Saturday and maybe a 20-miler on Sunday. Yeah, you just got to make your long runs longer it's not necessarily about getting more mileage. I didn't run too much more for a 50 miler, and how I would prepare for a 50K, I would just mainly make my long runs longer on the weekends.
What about pacing? Do you wear a Garmin that tells you how?
Yeah, I do wear a watch, but if you come from a road background and following your splits of like, oh, I got to have a 7-minute mile pace or 7:30 mile pace,
right.
You can't do that on the trails because the terrain is going to slow you down with all the rocks and roots you're watching out for.
Right.
And there's going to be some big climbs that you're going to be running up slowly or even hiking. There's going to be downhills. So I try my best not to pay too much attention to my pace and get worked up on that. But I'll definitely study the course and past times of people I compare to and know, like, okay, this is a good pace, or I'm going a little slower, and things like that.
Wow. And let's talk about, to do this, if you're doing 50 miles, how are you hydrating? What are you using? And maybe you can kind of show us over here with our props what these things are. How about this?
So yeah, this is my little hydration pack that I always wear. Because that's one of the first questions people ask. Like, well, what do you carry? What do you eat? Typically people will wear like a little hydration pack like this. You'll put your water bottles up here in the front, and then you've got the, you can put your gels, your food bars, other things like that, because when you're doing these trail races that last longer, you're going at a slower pace, so you actually can eat solid food. So you can get to an aid station and use like, oh, there's some potatoes, or there's some avocado, or there's some boiled eggs, or bacon. People love bacon during ultra marathons. It's a lot more solid food that's going to be more satiating and last, because if you're running with the real sugary gels for too long, most people get sick to their stomach. Because beyond a certain time limit, you can only take so much of that stuff in. So it's a lot more mixing in real food that keeps you more full. And satiated. And then like some of these little gels, like I'll run with
show
these.
that up to the camera there. Now people, when I mention gels, they don't even understand what is that.
Okay, so a gel is basically taking food or some type of sugar and making it into a gooey substance, so you can rip this package off and get it down easy. You're not having to chew and work through it. And most of them are very sugar-based and can make your stomach upset. But the ones I take, this is a company started by a guy who lives here in Nashville, actually, called Spring Energy. And these are all made from real food. So he combines all these different types of food, and then it's still sort of in that gel type consistency, but it's coming from real food, so it's going to sit on your stomach better. But so people will mix in some gels and then real food throughout.
Okay.
And in terms of drinking, people will have water. People will drink a lot of Coke at the aid stations.
What is this?
So this is like the little water bottle I'll have in here. Some people run with like the hard plastic water bottles, but I did that, and like from all the pounding or the vest sloshing around, it can like bruise your ribs with a hard plastic bottle. So like I like running with these soft water flasks because they won't beat up your ribs as much.
Right.
But people will drink Cokes.
Coca-Colas?
Yeah, Coca-Cola. Yeah,
that's
not
totally
uncommon.
Sugary.
I know. But it gives them that little kick, and it depends. Some people can thrive on the sugar to a certain point. Some people can do it for the whole race. Some people late, like they just, ooh, Coke, that's what I want, and we'll go to it. But that's the cool thing about ultras is you can eat lots of different things. You can drink different products. There's not one set way to hydrate and fuel yourself. You got to find what works.
So 50 miles, you are in various terrain. Kind of explain some of the terrain that you have, the various terrain, where you talked about being in
Washington. That race was called White River 50, and that race has 2 big climbs and 2 big descents. So the first 3 miles was flat, running through big trees, but then you had a 6-mile climb, 6 to 8 mile climb over 3,000 feet where you're jogging a little bit, but you're hiking most of it. The really fast elites will run just about all the climbs, but for most people, they're mixing in hiking and running, if not hiking the whole thing. And then there's rocks mixed in there, and then you get to the top, and there's cool views, and then it was a big 6-mile downhill, and then it sort of pretty much repeated the same thing in the second half of the race.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the most that you have done is what and where?
Is a 100-miler. I did my first 100-mile race this June in Wyoming. It's called the Bighorn 100-miler.
Wyoming. You went all the way to Wyoming.
Yeah.
100 miles.
Yeah. I like to pick out races in the summer. I'm a school teacher, so I have 2 months off in the summer, and I like to pick out a fun race out west to go do and have a little vacation around, because when you're running for 50 miles or 100 miles, you're going to see a lot of terrain, and it's a really neat way to see a lot of different places in a short amount of time. Yeah, so this race in Wyoming, it's really famous for its wildflowers, and they were in bloom. It was so pretty. And when you're running over here on the East Coast, you usually get on the single track trail and you're in the trees. You very rarely come out to an opening where you can see out the mountains. But out there, a lot of it, you were running in the open, and you could see the big mountains down in the valley, and it was really cool.
So I can't imagine 100 miles, and you're running, and then do you walk and run and walk and run?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Yeah, so for 100 miles, I walked all the hills. I hiked all the hills.
You call it hiking?
Yeah, ultra runners like to call it power hiking, but it's just hiking, yeah.
So it's hiking?
Yeah, you're just hiking. You're walking, yeah. Because if you were to run the hills, you would make yourself way too tired. You'd wear out your muscles. And you wouldn't have anything left for late in the race. So yeah, the goal for me was to run the flats, hike the uphill, and be able to run downhill. But you can also run the downhills too hard, and your quads will get sore, and because that's the main muscle that's absorbing all of the force running downhill. And if they're not trained properly for that, people will run the downhills too hard, and then when it comes late in the race, their quads are so sore or they're cramping that they can't even run the downhills.
Wow.
So yeah, my goal was to not go too hard on the downhill so I could run at the end, because you had a big 8-mile downhill towards the finish.
Wow.
But yeah.
And then you finished?
I did, yeah.
Okay.
The race is also famous for its shoe-sucking mud, and it rained for 12 hours and got very, very muddy. I had a buddy who went out to pace me. That's another thing in ultras. You can have a pacer, so they'll meet you later in the race at an aid station, and they're just, most of the time they'll run with you through the night because you're getting tired by that point, and they'll make sure you're staying on course, remind you to eat, and things like that.
How do you see things at night?
You wear a headlamp.
Whoa, there you are in a headlamp doing 100 miles.
So yeah, you're like a miner out there with your headlamp.
Wow.
But yeah, my buddy, he was trying to keep me entertained, and he identified 9 different types of mud and gave them different names. But it was like anytime you took a step, your foot was sliding one way or the other to find traction.
Unbelievable.
And because of that mud, I had to walk 30 miles of it. You couldn't run. You could, but you probably would have fell and hurt yourself. There was a guy who slipped, both of his feet went out from under him. He got a concussion because his head hit the ground so hard.
Oh my.
There was a lady who fell and broke her nose because of the mud. Yeah, so it was quite the adventure.
Wow. That is inspirational. Now, these kind of stories you teach at Curry Ingram. You teach physical education. And then briefly, how does this translate to the students? Do they know what you do? Are you an example?
They do for the most part. I don't volunteer the information for the most part. It's usually my coworkers who find out and then brag on me to the kids. And then I'll have like a picture up in my room, and they're like, "Mr. Anderson, what's that from?" And then like coming back this first couple weeks, everybody asks, "What'd you do in the summer?" And they were like, "Mr. Anderson, what'd you do this summer? What'd you run?" I was like, "I did a 100-mile race." And they just get this look on their face for a second. But yeah, being the PE teacher, growing up, I didn't have the fittest of PE teachers, so it's nice to know that I am fit and I am a positive example to them, because I can get out there and run around and play with them, and it's not just the old cranky baseball coach sitting on the bleachers telling them to do this and do that when they can't even do that themselves. So yeah.
Right. So you're a prime example and an inspiration too for the kids to see. And there's got to be a lot of joy. Just briefly, the school that you teach at, it's that's the right word. It's not special needs, but it's special. Yeah,
we like to say kids who have learning differences.
Learning differences.
Yeah. So. The main ones we see are kids with ADHD, dyslexia, or various forms of autism. And the way I explain it to people is it's students who just can't cut it in a public school. There's too much stimulation, the class is too fast-paced, and they just need more focused, individualized attention, because at Kerr Ingram, we have class sizes anywhere from like 4 to 10 students. So the classes are small, the teachers know the students really well and know how to individualize the instruction, and it's just a really, really neat school, because you have these kids that have come in bullied, they have little confidence, it's really heartbreaking, but then it doesn't even take but a couple weeks, a month, they're these happy kids, their families are like, this has changed our life. It's really, really cool.
Wow. So you're an example of changing the children's life and your life. And then what's next for you? I mean, what is 100 miles?
So I did the one in Wyoming because there's this big race I want to do called Hard Rock. It's in Colorado in the San Juan Mountains. And you have to have a qualifying race to enter the lottery for it.
Oh, wow.
I'll have one ticket for the lottery in December, which gives me like a 1% chance. Most people, it takes 5 to 6, 7 years of applying to the lottery to get in. So I'm starting early to get my name in the hat, because eventually I'd like to run that. And there's another big race called Western States that you have to apply for. It was the first 100-mile race. It was originally a horse race, but the guy's horse went lame, so he's like, well, I'm just going to run the course.
Oh, my heavens.
And that's how 100-mile races started. And that's why for 100-mile races you get a belt buckle.
Nice. Look at that.
So that's where that came from.
Bighorn.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because when the
finisher, Trail 100.
Yeah, so that was the finisher award for 100-milers, because the guy who ran the first trail 100-miler was doing it as part of a horse race.
What fun.
Yeah.
Wow. That is really great. Well, I must say that now I think myself and our audience has learned about ultra marathons. And we will have to have you back to find out about what's going to be happening next. And you are an inspiration to really everybody and your students. So Ryne Anderson, thank you very, very much for being with us. That's Transitions, Body, Mind, Spirit.